Everybody good? Awesome. All right, so guys, yesterday we saw the quadratic formula, right? So just remember, the quadratic formula is great because it's foolproof. It will solve any degree 2 quadratic equation. So if you ever looked at a quadratic equation like, oh, would it factor? Could I use square roots? You never have to wonder with the quadratic formula. It will always work, all right? And just to review, when you are solving that quadratic equation and you're getting those two answers, those are the x-intercepts of its graph. So guys, we know 3 different things can happen. The two answers will be 2 different answers, and then the graph will look like this, where it crosses the x-axis at 2 different x values. You'll get the same answer twice, and then the graph will look like this, because it's the vertex that touches the x-axis. And then there's a third, and I said, or, what's the third scenario? Guys, I hinted at this yesterday. What happens to the parabolas that don't cross over the x-axis, that don't have an x-intercept? When you solve those quadratic equations, you are not going to get a real number. You're going to get an imaginary answer. I just want you guys to kind of be aware of that because it's the next section that we start. We're going to get imaginary numbers to the quadratics that we solve in the next section, okay? And those are going to be the ones that don't have any x-intercepts. But today, we're still going to concentrate on the parabolas that either have 2 different x-intercepts or the same x-intercept twice, okay? All right, but today's problems, I just want to show you what you have to do when you don't get a nice answer, but it needs to be reduced. It needs to be written in simplified form. So I'm going to do 2 problems with you off of Delta Math again, and then I'll let you guys get started on the homework, okay? All right, let me move mine up. All right, so guys, we're going to be solving a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. So here's our formula. Now let me grab us an example real quick. I have to find a certain kind of problem, so just give me a second, please.
Like start playing the video without presenting it at home.
It's just
And I never, ever do that. Ever. Oh my God.
It's just how it goes, though.
Oh yeah, whatever.
Guys, just give me 1 second. I'm just looking for a certain problem. I have to fish through Delta Math to find one that I'm looking for. Give me 1 second. Hang on, Josh. Come on. I know you're out there. No. 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 Hang on, I'm looking. Okay, guys, I guess I'll try this one. It's decent. All right, so on Delta Math, they're going to ask you to solve the equation for all. Guys, see how they're starting to put the word real solutions? That's because in the future, you might not get a real number. You might get an imaginary number as your answer. And they want your answer in simplest form. So you're going to have to make sure your square roots are reduced and your fractions, all right? So let's try and solve this one. Let me write it down, and then I'm going to go back to the notes. 2w squared minus 4w minus 9 equals 0. Let's try that one. All right, so there it is. So guys, there's our quadratic formula, our quadratic equation. The solve it is get everything on one side set equal to 0. So you have one square term, one W term, and one number. Luckily, that's already done for us. So let's get our A, B's, and C's so we can plug them into the formula. A in this problem is 2, the number in front of W squared. B is -4, the number in front of W. And C, the number by itself at the end, is -9. So now one at a time, let's plug them into the correct spots in the quadratic formula. So if I'm going to solve this equation for W, we're solving for W, not X, it's going to equal this. First, I need the opposite of B. So guys, if B is -4, the opposite of that is +4. Then we're going to take plus or minus the square root of. I need B, I have to square it. So -4, the whole thing squared. Always put B in parentheses so your calculator does not get that wrong. Then we're going to subtract 4. We're going to times it with A, which is 2. And we're going to times it with C, which is -9. And then all of that, the whole right side, is going to be divided by 2 times A, which is 2 times 2. Okay? Most of our work is always going to be cleaning up this square root. What number does this B squared minus 4AC become? So W will equal 4 plus or minus. Let's find out. So type this into your calculator and hit enter, but don't put it under a square root yet. Just figure out what number it gets. Because if it's going to be a decimal, we don't want a decimal. I want the actual number we're taking the square root of. So what does that become? If you plug it in, I believe it's 88. Anybody get 88? Yes? Okay. Positive 88. And then you're going to divide it by 4. All right, so here we go. Watch this. So now you go to the square root of 88. First, you're going to ask yourself, is that a number that I can take the square root of? Can I take the square root of 88 and get a whole number back? No. Now you have to ask yourself, can I simplify the square root of 88? Do any perfect squares divide evenly into 88? And yeah, guys, 4, right? I would just take 88 and start dividing it by my perfect squares. 88 divided by 81, 88 divided by 64, 88 divided by 49, 88 divided by 36. Just divide it by your perfect squares until you find the biggest one that works. And guys, it's 4. So now I'm just going to do it right off to the side. I can break this up into the square root of 4 times the square root of, well, 4 times 2 got you 88, 22. And 22 is a simplified square root because no perfect squares divide evenly into 22. So now that means this is going to become 2 because that's the square root of 4, and then the square root of 22 stays. So really, the square root of 88 needs to be written as 2 times the square root of 22. He has to be written in simplified form. So now we're going to say W equals 4 plus or minus, not the square root of 88, I want his simplified answer, 2 times the square root of 22. And then all of that is still divided by 4. Okay, so we can definitely say that we've simplified our square root. Now you have to worry about the fractions. Yesterday, we were not able to add this because this plus that is a really ugly decimal. And then nothing on top actually divided by the denominator yesterday. But guys, if you look, all of this is being divided by 4, right? This number can be divided by 4. This number in front of that square root can be reduced with 4. So now we definitely have division that we're going to be able to simplify. So do you guys remember when we were working with fractions earlier, I showed you guys, if you ever had this problem, 10 plus 15 divided by 5, right? 10 plus 15 is 25. 25 divided by 5 is 5. The answer to that problem is 5. But I told you guys, if you're ever adding or subtracting something together and dividing, you're allowed to split this into 2 separate fractions. Take 10, divide him by his own 5, plus 15, divided by his own 5. Because it doesn't change my answer. I'm still going to get 2 plus 3. I'm still going to get 5, which was the answer to that problem. So guys, we're going to use the same thing here. What I want you to do is I want you to take the 2 separate terms and give them their own denominator of 4. We're going to split these into 2 separate fractions. So we're going to take 4, divide him by his own 4, and then plus or minus, I'm going to take 2 times the square root of 22 and divide that by its own 4. So you're just splitting the top into 2 separate fractions. So now you'll be able to reduce your fractions separately. So guys, what's 4 divided by 4? That's 1. That's a whole number. That's not even a fraction anymore. And then I'm going to get plus or minus. The number under the square root we can never get to, right? But I can reduce the number in front and the number on bottom. So guys, what does 2 over 4 reduce to? It reduces to 1/2. So I really have 1 times the square root of 22 over 2. This, 2 over 4, reduces to 1/2. Can you see that on camera, I hope? All right, so now you have options. I don't have to put this 1 in front. It can just be the square root of 22 divided by 2. But if you feel better putting it, then please feel free. But guys, this is your reduced, simplified answer. It's still 2 very ugly decimals, but we don't want the decimals. We want it in its simplest, exact form. So one answer is when I take 1 and I add it with the square root of 22 divided by 2. My second answer is when I take 1 and subtract the square root of 22 divided by 2. But guys, if you notice, it's only the square root of 22 who's being divided by 2 now. This is no longer a fraction. So I'm going to type this into Delta Math and hope for my green check. All right, so if we go back to Delta Math, can you see that I'm over here in the answer box? Now you want to type in 1 plus or minus the square root of 22. And again, if you want to put the 1 in front, you can. Plus or minus 1 times the square root of 22. Now division sign. Now you see how it's only the square root that's over the fraction? That's what we want, because only the square root is being divided by 22 now, or divided by 2. And then put it over 2, and that should be your simplified exact answer. And you get your green check, okay? So again, it's the same process, it's just in the end, we're going to have a square root that needs to be simplified, and then we're going to have fractions that need to be simplified. I'm going to do one more with you just to make sure you're okay, and I'll let you guys get started on the homework. Let me just find one other problem. Give me a second to find a good one. Josh, you okay? All right, let's do this one. Let's solve this one. This will be fine. All right, now we're going to solve r squared plus 2r minus 20 equals negative 3. All right, let me go back to your notes. All right, if we solve this one, right? If I'm going to solve this using the quadratic formula, I need everything on one side set equal to 0, right? So I have one square term, one r term, and one number. So let's add this 3 over. And you're going to get r squared plus 2r minus 17 equals 0. All right, let's figure out who our A, B, and C are so we can plug them into the formula. In this problem, A, it's always the number in front of the square term, so in this case, it's assumed to be 1. B is always the number in front of R, which is 2. And C is always the number by itself at the end, which is negative 17. Okay? All right, let's plug them in. So in this case, we're solving for R. So R will equal the opposite of B. In this case, is going to be negative 2. If this is 2, the opposite of that is negative 2. Plus or minus the square root of, I need B, which is 2. I got to square it. Please put it in parentheses. Then we're going to subtract 4. We're going to times that with A is 1 times C, which is negative 17. And then all of that gets divided by 2 times A, which is 1. All right, so yet again, we got to go right to that square root. We have to figure out what number are we taking the square root of. Who does that b squared minus 4ac become? So type this into your calculator, hit enter, and see what number we get underneath that square root. But don't put it under a square root yet. All right, don't put it in your calculator under a square root. And I believe you get positive 72. Anybody get positive 72? Yes? Okay. So positive 72, all divided by 2. So let's go back to that square root. Can I take the square root of 72 and get a whole number? No. But can I simplify the square root of 72? Do any of my perfect squares divide evenly into it? Yeah, guys. Take 72, start dividing it by your perfect squares. The closest one without going over, I believe, is 64. What's 72 divided by 64? What's 72 divided by 49? What's 72 divided by 36? Oh, 36 divides evenly in. So 36 is your biggest perfect square. So I'm going to break that up. I'm just going to simplify it right off to the side. The square root of 36 times the square root of 2, because 36 times 2 is 72. So that's going to simplify to 6 times the square root of 2. So now I need to put this in his place. I need the simplified square root in the place. So now I'm going to get r equals negative 2 plus or minus, not the square root of 72, I want his simplified, 6 times the square root of 2. And then it's still divided by 2. So guys, yesterday, the square root didn't simplify, and the fractions didn't simplify. But if you look at the numbers that you have on top that are not under a square root, guys, they can be reduced with 2. They can be divided by 2. So there's definitely some more simplifying that we can do as far as these fractions are concerned. So let's split it. Let's split this into 2 separate fractions. So I'm going to take negative 2 divided by his own 2, and then plus or minus will go in the middle. Then I'm going to take 6 times the square root of 2 and divide that by its own 2. Just split the numerator. Now we can do separate simplification. What is negative 2 divided by 2? Guys, that actually divides. That's negative 1. And then plus or minus. Again, we'll never be able to get to that 2 because he's stuck under a square root. But I can divide or reduce the numbers in front. What is 6 divided by 2? Guys, that's 3. That's a whole number. So that's going to go to a 3 times the square root of 2. I'm actually not left with a fraction at all. My 2 answers are negative 1 plus 3 times the square root of 2. And my second answer is negative 1 minus 3 times the square root of 2. So this is your simplified exact answer. Does that make sense, Josh? You okay? All right, guys at home, is that okay? All right, let me just type that in. So I would go to my answer box. I'm typing in negative 1 plus or minus 3 times the square root of 2. Hit submit, and I get my green check. Okay? Is everybody okay with that? So tonight's homework, you got to look to reduce your square roots. You got to look to reduce your fractions. All right? Tonight's homework is 5 questions. You have 5 questions. I know they take some time, so I didn't want to overload you with too many. All right? I'm going to double check the attendance. If you don't have any questions, you guys are free to go to start working. Don't forget, though, yesterday's problems are due tonight at 11:45.